This is the Redacted Apostate. I am Carl,
I'm Nicole.
and today we're going to talk about Jim Jones and the Jonestown Massacre.
And what really happened at Jonestown?
Yeah. Also, kind of about Jim Jones's life. What would lead someone to?
Do what he did.
Yeah, and maybe also what would lead others to follow along on that path
Mm-hmm.
as well. So
I think about this a lot because it's one of those turn of the cosmic dial where if my mother would have got in contact with the People's Church, she might have joined that cult instead of the one that she ended up in.
Interesting. So she joined about in the 70s.
Yep.
Is that the timeline?
Yep.
That makes sense. So you were already born when she joined?
Yep.
Okay. So
Mhm.
she wasn't part of it and then you were born?
Yep.
Okay.
So she easily could have joined the People's, because I think we're going to get into this.
Mm-hmm.
One of the racism within the church really bothered her.
Yes.
Within traditional Protestant churches really bothered her. And that was one of the reasons why she chose the church she chose.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Perception of anti-racism.
Yes. Of inclusion.
Right.
Yeah.
It was all false, but that's how she saw it.
Yeah. And in doing a lot of the research on Jim Jones, there's this question, and there's even a question among people that really know this stuff, because I don't. I've done a lot of research on
You researched it a lot.
but I still don't feel that I'm anywhere, an expert or even a semi-expert on Jim Jones or the People's Temple. There's so much information out there that even, a week of doing research is not enough.
Well, it's one of those things where it's such a terrible thing that happened, and people want to get their heads around, how did this happen?
Agreed. And the other thing to think about as well is that when, in my opinion, that if you are a cult leader or, someone that is controlling another group of people, you're not going to put the secret sauce out there in public. You're not going to say, this is how I actually believe, and these are the steps I'm doing to control people. So there's no information because he wouldn't have made that stuff public. So the stuff that we know would be the lieutenants that survived or people that left the church, and the recordings from Jonestown that occurred.
And you listened to all those recordings, right?
Yeah, I did. I felt it was something I needed. This was before, too. This wasn't due to the research. But I just started down this path and saw that there was a recording of his last, what do you call it? Whenever a preacher, his preachings that he was
Sermon?
doing. The sermon, his last sermon, thank you. And so I listened to it, and it's horrible. It is absolutely horrible, and it's still something that I think about today.
Yeah, I won't listen to it.
I don't recommend, unless you've got a strong stomach, for anybody to listen to it. It is terrible, absolutely terrible. So let's talk about Jim Jones. Let's talk about his childhood and him growing up, and you start to kind of see a pattern of behavior that I have a feeling that Jim Jones was a believer of what he preached to a degree, but he also used religion as a tool to gain followers.
And money, maybe. Did he use it as a tool for money?
I don't think so. He did have money, but that never seemed to be his main course of action was purely money. It always seemed like he was after followers. I think he utilized money to control the people. And we'll get into that definitely. There's a huge section on there on especially whenever he moved to California, how he treated the members of the temple and the methodology he used for control. And with any one of these groups, there's always this kind of ramp up for control. You don't just start a organization and say everybody's going to give me everything they have.
It's a slow process.
It's a slow process.
Yeah.
So there's no like real timeline. In 1961 he did this, in 1962 he did that. It's more of, in this year there were a lot of allegations, so they had to look back at it, and there was also a lot of oversight that was missed by government, police, churches, organizations. It was just a very interesting time that this all occurred too.
Yep.
As well.
There was a lot of cults in that time
Yes.
period.
Yes. And there's also information too that he was learning from other cults that existed during this time.
There's a lot of cults now, but I think in
Yeah.
that, like between the 50s and the 70s, like that time period in history, a lot of religious apocalyptic cults. I think because society was changing so rapidly in the 30 years, and where we are today, I mean, even 50 years ago, is just so different.
Well, one of the tools that Jim Jones used was the fear that existed during this time.
Of change.
You had the onset of the Cold War. You had nuclear annihilation was a possibility. You had the racial segregation and the treatment of minorities across the United States. And he utilized each one of those to further sow fear into his members.
Right.
So that time period was definitely a time period of fear, and you just never know what was going to happen, the next day.
Right. And that would lead someone to join a cult.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. So, yeah, well, there's even more to it as well, because there's also some religious doctrine that he utilized as well to kind of prove he was who he said he was. So, yeah, let's kick this off. Let's talk about James Warren Jones, or Jim Jones as we know him now. So he was born in 1931, and he was born to a military father who served in World War I, and was on basically disability due to a chemical weapons attack that he was involved in. So he couldn't breathe, he couldn't move much, and a mother who was not very maternal. She had her own issues. She might have even been had some mental issues of her own. She used to swear, and like nowadays, she probably wouldn't even been like an eye would have been glanced at her. But back in the 30s, yeah, she was definitely a woman that would not have been looked well upon in society. So, and he was born poor. So this was the Depression. You had his father who couldn't work on any job because he basically was physically sick all the time.
Right.
They lost their house. They grew up in a shack, didn't have running water or electricity. And all of their resources was due to family members giving it to them.
Wow. Was he an only child?
Yes, as far as I can tell. And I still have not found any other information that shows that he had any siblings.
Well, I wonder if his siblings, when the tragedy happened, like disowned him or changed their
wanted to
names.
expunge him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that definitely could have been. They go into detail later on about what occurred after 1978, about family members and stuff like that, but no brothers or sisters in that list. So if they did a really good job of wiping themselves from removing themselves from the
From census
yeah,
stuff, yeah.
yeah. So, um, so Jones as a child really had an affinity towards the Pentecostal church, and he also had a strong desire to preach. So, um, let me go past a few pages here. So the big thing with him is that because he grew up poor, that he didn't have any real place to stay. So people that would talk about him later would say that he was like a wild animal roaming the streets.
Hmm.
He was roaming the streets naked, basically. No money, their family was going out into the woods and scrounging for food.
Wow.
I mean, think of the poorest that you possibly could be, and that was their family.
Hmm.
So in 1934, he was 3 years old. They were evicted from their house, and that's when they lived in the shack. So he was 3 when, he was still barely conscious whenever he was kicked out. So that's what he knew from an early age. So in 1942, his family went to Richmond, Indiana. And in Richmond, Indiana, they stayed with the Kennedy family. And the Kennedy family was believe they were a Pentecostal family. The father was the preacher of the church.
Hmm.
And the wife of that preacher, kind of saw Jim Jones as this, someone that needed assistance, needed help. And
How old was he at this time?
so at this
11?
this
10?
time he was 11 years old.
Huh.
Yeah, yeah. And her name was Myrtle Kennedy. And there was the Nazarene Church. And in the Nazarene Church, they followed this thing called the Holiness Code. And this is kind of at 11, you can already see the kind of the forerunning of Jim Jones' belief into religion.
What's it called?
The Holiness Code.
The Holiness Code.
Yes, yes. And the Holiness Code says that through religion, a person is made perfect. Or a Christian person is made perfect.
Hmm.
They also had this idea too that you would get your baptism and then you would get a second and third baptism, and the second one would remove all inherent sin. So the sin that you're born with would be gone through the second baptism. It's called the second work of grace. The Holy Spirit cleanses original sin. It's regeneration ideals. It's John Wesley Methodism.
Hmm.
So one of the other beliefs too is that there is the men of God. I'm trying to remember the term. There's a lot to this religion that was interesting. That there would be disciples, living people that were disciples of God, and they would have extra powers. They would be able to read minds and teleport across and be in 3 different locations at once. And
Wow.
they would have supernatural powers that would equal Jesus. So
Jesus had supernatural powers?
that's according to them, yes.
Huh.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, he was able to lay hands on people, right? I mean,
Like he was able to heal people.
yeah, and turn water to wine, and so all of those kind of powers that Jesus had would have been attributed to normal people, or people born of earth that were not divine,
Mm-hmm.
through this.
And did Jim Jones have any of these superpowers?
After he met with them, yes, he did.
What were the Jim Jones superpowers?
Well, one, he could fly.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
So after he broke his arm from trying to fly, this carries on through the rest of his life until 1978.
So he would tell people he could fly?
He could fly. He could heal people. I think at one point he was alluding to he could read minds, control people.
Well, that's true.
Mm-hmm. He definitely could control people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He probably couldn't read minds, but he was adept at saying what people wanted to hear.
Yes. And that's when he got into the Methodist. So he would go to the big church, like tent events where
Revivals.
they had the healing revivals.
Mm-hmm.
So he met up with a figure that was actually really large into those healing revivals. I'm trying to find his name because his name is actually really important. Just pause until I can find that name. Actually, we can get back to that because he hasn't met him yet. Yeah, we'll come back to that. Let's talk about his high school, because his high school was interesting too. So he never wanted to play sports because he hated the idea of losing. So if you don't play the sports, then you can't lose. So
Yeah.
it was no big deal. But he did coach sports for younger kids. He eventually was kicked out when he threw a dog from an upstairs window and killed it in front of the other players.
Wow.
No reason why. Probably proving a point somewhere. But shortly after that, he was removed as the coach.
Wow.
And then he became an orderly at Reed Hospital in Richmond, Indiana.
Didn't you say, like, in his early life, he used to kill small animals too?
Yeah. So he would do mock funerals for roadkill that he found. So this was after the visit to Richmond when he met with the Kennedy family. I think that was really pivotal. Was, if you think about it, like, you're living your whole life, you have nothing. The people around you think that you're worthless. You're living in a shack with no running water, no electricity. You're literally eating from the woods, anything that you can find. And then all of a sudden you visit them and you're welcomed and fed, and there's this organization that totally believes in you, and that you might even have special powers. So I think it was at this time that he kind of fell in love with the idea of religion giving to him.
That makes sense.
So he took it totally to heart. He would preach to kids. He would make them attend funerals for this roadkill that he found. But when he ran out of roadkill, he would kill animals so that he could have funerals for them.
Wow.
Yeah. It was also at this time too that he was reading books by Karl Marx, by Adolf Hitler, by Gandhi, and forcing kids to reenact the Nazi parades and doing.
And that was before the U.S. got involved in the war?
Yeah. So, right about the same time. I would say 1943, 1944, around there. So about the time that all this was going down. So
so he never was old enough to be in a war.
No, he was in high school he graduated high school in 1948.
So right after the war ended. So he was born right after the World War I, and then wasn't old enough to enlist for World War II. So he's this weird time period that he.
And if he was still kind of following this life, I think the only thing that would have been different is that he would have enlisted if he was early enough. So if he was 17, 18, he would have probably enlisted or been drafted.
But the war ended in what, 45?
Yeah, around 45.
So he was too young at that point.
Yeah.
So he like history would be completely different if he would have
Been a little older.
been
Yeah.
a little older and gone to World
Correct.
War II. Yeah.
Correct. Or a little younger as well. Again, it was the right time where the Depression was going, was happening, that everything was just shit for anybody that lived.
Right.
But if your parents couldn't work at all, then you had less than nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So the only reason that he survived is because of extended family.
Yeah.
And then the church that he visited in 1942. So in high school, he he wouldn't talk to any, like if anybody came up and talked to him, he would never talk to them. He would only have a conversation with somebody if he initiated the conversation.
Hmm.
And it was typically about how they're going to hell for whatever activity that they were doing. He used to preach to them all the time.
I remember those kind of kids.
Yeah.
I think I was one of those kind of kids.
I think we've all been that kind of person once in our life. So
I'm sorry for all the stuff I said when I was in a cult.
yeah. And during high school, he was an orderly at Reed Hospital. And he was dating a candy striper named Marceline. And then in 1948, he graduated at the age of 17 with honors from high school.
Mm-hmm.
So not a dumb kid, definitely smart. And you don't just graduate when you're 17. Maybe they did it early just to get rid of him. Who knows? But
I graduated. I was 17. I barely graduated though.
yeah, me too. So maybe we're future cult leaders. Who knows?
Well, they used to do things differently because my birthday is the beginning of September, and I was allowed in.
That makes sense.
And nowadays, there's like these hard cutoffs. Back
weird.
then, there wasn't as hard cutoffs.
Yeah.
I also didn't go.
Mine's in June, so mine was at the end. So
yeah.
So they always had a weird time with me as well.
Did you graduate when you were 17 or?
No, I graduated when I was 18, but barely.
Mm-hmm.
But I was on that cutoff of the before, not on the after. So
yeah,
it was definitely weird in the 2000s, being when you graduate high school.
Right. My God. I also didn't go to kindergarten. I never attended kindergarten.
Yeah, I don't remember if I did or not. I'm sure I did. But we were all just amorphous blobs at that point. So
yeah,
it's like remembering anything at that point is you're lucky. So after high school, he moved to Bloomington, Indiana, and he attended Indiana University. He wanted to become a doctor. So, and then
that's scary.
Yeah. There's a lot of scary stuff here, like when you start to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can't think about this stuff too much. So in 1949, he married Marceline, the candy striper.
Mm-hmm.
And I still think he had his issues then, but he wasn't full force into the revival ministries or anything else like that. So he hadn't started all the building his ministry. And at this point, he wasn't even talking about going into religion, into the ministry.
Mm-hmm.
He was like full force, I'm going to be a doctor. And then by 1951, he dropped out of that college, and then they moved to Indianapolis, Indiana. And then he studied at Butler University, and he did get a degree in secondary education. So this comes up later as well. And I don't know if at this point, if his intention was to get a group of people or not. Because it does seem like that this is the beginning of it. Because in 1951, he also started attending the Communist Party meetings in Indianapolis.
Wow.
So 1951, this was before communism was super bad.
That was pretty bad. I mean, that's right when McCarthy was outing people in
Yeah.
Hollywood.
Yeah. Yeah. And that also probably had a lot to do with because one of the things that Jim Jones really attached to was that your beliefs are looked down upon by others, by the government, by normal society.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt he used that information to
Well,
bring people to his cause.
right, because that's how cults trap you in this
Us and them.
mind. Well, the us and them, but also that we are superior because we don't do this thing, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And we're the better people because we don't do whatever it is that they're doing. So in that case, if he's saying, "Oh, we don't look down on anyone for their beliefs, so we're much better than the government. We're much better than people that are trying to oppress us."
And he looked down upon the Episcopalians too, because they had their churches segregated majorly.
Mm-hmm.
And he also saw too that, like, when he was actually coaching those kids, that even the kids that he was coaching, they were segregated then as well. And so this is where you kind of get into what were Jim Jones' beliefs, because even from an early age, he was very strongly against segregation and racism in any form.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that he saw communism as an answer to, or socialism as an answer to racism and the, what do you call it, economic differences
I wonder
between people as well.
where he got to that point. I mean, being raised in Indiana as a white man, it seems like a huge leap to be an anti-segregationist.
Well, yes, and especially Indiana, because at this time the KKK and white supremacists were marching in the open.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it has to do with how he was raised, being poor.
Oh, most of the KKK are poor.
Right.
I mean, they're...
But at 11, he would have either been indoctrinated by a KKK member, and we would have had a totally different Jim Jones, or he went to the church and got indoctrinated by that story, because he went to the church, then started talking about how the segregation and racism was really bad. So I think it was that teaching. He absorbed what they were saying like a sponge.
And that's the age, that prepubescent, early pubescent age, when your mind is this like that, and that's one of the things that has a big impact in our personalities, is what information we absorbed.
Yes.
In that age.
Yeah.
Which is really scary for our children.
Oh, our kids are screwed. 100% they're screwed.
Yeah. We keep teaching them about cults and not to join a cult. And
yeah, it's like, hey, there's cults out here. Please don't do it.
Yeah, please don't join.
But they do cool stuff, right? Please don't join.
They give out candy and cupcakes, right?
Right. Yeah. So this is when you break down timelines, this is where stuff gets interesting. 1951, attends the Communist Party meetings. 1952, becomes a Methodist minister. So that's a leap for me.
It seems like an odd leap, because I thought the communists were atheists.
Yes, and that's why if you look at his life and you look at how, if you don't look at it in a timeline form, the story is different. But when you look at the timeline, you start to notice trends. And the thing that I noticed was, when something occurred, there was another line right after it that was a direct correlation. So you could almost see what he was thinking on the page, kind of. And I don't want to say that, oh, yeah, I know Jim Jones. I do not. And I don't want to. But you start to see patterns about why he does certain things.
Mm-hmm.
You can extrapolate why he does certain things based on what's in there. So late 1951, he goes to the Communist Party meeting. Early 1952, he becomes a minister for the Methodist Church.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because he realized in 1951 that the way for him to spread his Marxist ideals was to use the church.
Oh, wow.
And that was a quote from Jim Jones.
Wow.
When he was talking about his early life. So that's why, he says he's a Christian and he says he was a Methodist, but he also says he's agnostic and an atheist at the same time. And in in 1977, he had an interview where he said, I'm an atheist, but you're a Methodist, preacher. So why are you a Methodist preacher? Well, it's to expand his communist ideology.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that if he was anything, he was a Marxist first, communist second. And him being a Methodist minister and everything else that he does with the religion was a means to get people to join the Communist Party. I think that was actually his primary goal in his life. And that he would utilize anything to further the communist ideology in the United States. And the rest of the information does follow that as well, all the way up past his death.
So he was a believer, but not a believer in the way that we've always thought he was
Correct.
a believer.
Correct. And I mean, when he's being interviewed and he's specifically telling people, I'm an atheist, but he would tell his followers something different. So he had a private message, he had a member message, anybody that joined the People's Temple. He had a public message, and then he had a widespread public message, and each one of them were different stories. So depending on, because you said, he would tell people whatever he thought that they wanted to hear. And that is exactly right. Because if he was talking to the public, he wanted to push his communist, Marxist, specifically Marxism, not so much communism. They just were the closest to the Marxist belief. His Marxist beliefs onto the United States. That's what he wanted, was a Eden utopia based on Marxist principles.
Wow.
And that would only occur after nuclear Armageddon. Spoiler alert. So, and it kind of goes back to this whole idea of him being guided by the angel of death.
That's interesting that this Marxism would happen after Armageddon, because that's essentially what the religion I was raised in said.
Yeah, I think it's a common theme, and I think a lot of it has to do with that. Where is that page? There was there's a term for it in the latter rain, and I think a lot of it has to do with the latter rain. And I'd be very curious to see if your cult had any information pulled from the latter rain movement.
I think it goes back earlier than that, from the Seventh-day Adventist. Early 1900s, when they were kind of the same church, and then they sprouted off into a bunch of different religions.
And latter rain comes before that, by the way.
Yeah.
1860s, I believe.
Yeah, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
And they used to call it a theocracy, that we would be living under a theocracy, but
right,
it's really communism.
Right. Yeah, so this was the healing revival for latter rain, and latter rain is this is when he really started to dig in his heels and go past that.
This is really scary learning about this because of the similarities to the religion I was raised in.
Well, and it's one of the things that, as the more research that I do, the more the same themes keep coming up, which is good and bad. Because it's good because if you can boil down how these cults and organizations start, then you can kind of see them forming, or you are following them or talking to people that are part of these same kind of organizations. It's this almost occult kind of religion, this secret part of the religion where nobody's telling you what's going on in them. You have to find out by joining, and that's an issue. Like, if you're joining a religion, you should be able to see everything right from the get-go. If anybody's holding anything back or secretive, you can only know if you go to a next level. That's a big red flag.
Right.
And that's not what's occurring here, though, just to let you know. He was telling anybody anything that they wanted to know to further his cause.
So it seems like his cause is, and this is based on the religion that I was raised in. So it's, we are alive in this latter days, the end times, and we know that Armageddon's coming. So he's an atheist, but he still believes that Armageddon's coming. Oh no, he believes Armageddon is nuclear war.
Yes, it wouldn't be Armageddon.
Not Armageddon. He says nuclear war is coming. In my church, it was Armageddon is coming.
It's the same outcome.
Right, which means everyone gets destroyed except for a very select few, 144,000. Ugh, I hate that number.
But that was Jewish men, though, right?
Yeah, only 144,000 Jewish men get survived. Get survived.
Get survived. Okay, Jeff.
Yeah. So once that apocalypse, whether it's Armageddon or God comes and destroys the earth, then those people that survived, then it's they live under communism and everything. The whole Fight Club slate gets wiped clean.
Yes.
All debts are paid at that point.
Yes.
And now everyone's the same and everyone's even. There's no racism. And that's almost exactly the cult that.
And being led by super people.
Right, exactly. Led by the 144,000 super people.
Oh, wow. Then they really just were like, that number, that's the number that we're going to keep, and everything else is.
That was the number.
See, with what I found about latter rain and I have another page floating around here. I would like to find it, but it's like the disciples of men or something like that. And
you can't see. He's got all these notes, these crazy.
I'm like a crazy person here. There it is. I found the page. Notes. There it is. The manifested sons of God.
That's similar to the manifest destiny, where people have the right to kill indigenous people.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah. And Joel's army. And I still haven't figured out who the hell Joel is. I want to learn. If anybody knows what Joel's army is, please let me know.
I think it's from a book in the Bible. Is Joel the dude that killed Jezebel? I don't know. I can't remember Bible stories anymore. It's been so long. But I always loved Jezebel. Jezebel was my favorite character.
I thought it was the wrestler that killed Jezebel.
What? The wrestler?
Yeah. He sued them because he was talking about Hulk Hogan.
Oh my God. The magazine. What? No, it wasn't.
The online magazine Jezebel, yeah.
No, it wasn't called Jezebel. Was it Jezebel?
It was Jezebel, yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, I
like my story better.
Yeah. Well, her story was freaking cool.
Yeah.
She got killed for being a different culture. Essentially, that's it. Like, some Jewish king married her, brought her in, and she's like, I want to be my own culture and live the way that I've always lived.
They're like, well, not around these parts, you don't.
Yeah, exactly.
You done messed up. We're going to have to kill you, lady.
Exactly. Just you wear too much eyeliner.
Oh, she's that kind of woman.
Yeah, well, that's how they portrayed her. And so they always portrayed her as a prostitute. I think they're
Because she wore too much eyeliner.
because she wore too much eyeliner.
God, that's such a religious thing to do.
And it's so funny. Recently, somebody posted that they always loved Jezebel in the picture books that I was raised with, because she was like super draggy. Like she had like all this makeup, and she was like really given the like look there.
She was using Hawthorne wipes, you know?
Yeah, she just was like, she was all out. But her story, one day we should like dive deep into her story, because I've always been fascinated with Jezebel.
Yeah.
Because in my mind, she was just killed for being who she was.
Being slightly different.
Being not Jewish.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that tracks.
Yeah.
So.
All right, so Joel's army.
Yeah, well, the Joel's army, right, or the manifested sons, is the latter rain movement leaders taught that at the end of the age approach, the manifested sons of God would appear in the church. They would be empowered with supernatural gifts and able to perform miracles comparable to the miracles ascribed to Jesus Christ in the New Testament. These manifest sons of God, ones who have come into the full stature of Jesus Christ, would receive the Spirit without measure. So they would be +5 Holy Spirit, you know, and only roll natural 20s on the dice. So
Nerd.
I am. I'm not going to even argue that. Yeah, so
So he was part of Joel's army.
no. So that's the thing, is he never talks about manifested sons of God or Joel's army. He was just part of the latter rain movement, which this was one of their beliefs. So this isn't so much. See, that's the thing, right? Is that there's not a section anywhere that said that where Jim Jones says, "I believe in this. I believe in this." He only says, "I'm a communist and I'm an atheist." It's really it. I'm sure there's more that he talked about ad nauseum, but this is those two things are the only things that I could find where in private, to other members, to reporters, things that were written that they found after he died. Those are the only two things that I found that you could lock in and say, yes, that's what he believed in. Everything else is, you don't know. You don't know, does he believe this or is he using this? And you can never piece that out. And I'm not just talking about this from my own standpoint, like the people that have actually studied Jonestown and studied Jim Jones and written theses on him, they don't know what he believed, because there's no piece of evidence that he believed anything other than those two things that I have found.
That he was a communist.
That he was a Marxist, I should say.
Marxist.
Yeah,
and
Marxist.
atheist.
Yeah, and an atheist or agnostic. He also said possibly agnostic. So, which tracks because of the ties to Russia, but we'll get to that later.
Wouldn't it be funny if like he died and he went straight to hell? Like hell was real.
It's real. It's real.
Your pretty face is going to hell.
Yeah, he probably is one of those guys in there, Jim Jones.
Yeah. God. Works for Hell Corporation.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just reading this real quick, so we can cut this out. Okay, yeah. So this page is important about the manifested sons of God. So the other thing too was within the latter rain movement, there were levels of belief in the manifested sons of God. So you had people that were like, yeah, some people are going to come back and they're going to have powers, or Jesus is going to come back and have these powers. Then you get all the way down to some leaders used Ephesians 4 to develop the idea of a fivefold ministry. I don't know if you've heard about this or not.
Never heard of that.
This is interesting.
Fivefold ministry.
Yeah. In practice, this led to the creation of a strongly authoritarian leadership structure where members were required to submit themselves to the direction of their leaders for life guidance, decision-making, and discipline.
Well, that was the church I was raised in.
Yes. The fivefold ministry views feature especially strongly in the shepherding movement, which transmitted the concept into the charismatic movement.
So shepherding was a term that was used in the cult I was raised in.
Okay.
And what that
I
means,
wonder if they were an offshoot of Latter Rain.
it sounds like it.
Yeah.
It really does. It sounds like they have this similar background.
So that makes you and your mom's story even more scary.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, the fact that they were both a fork,
Yeah.
off of each other,
Yeah.
which could possibly have been.
So shepherding was when the church leaders would come to your house and indoctrinate you privately.
Wow.
And so they would come over, and the really good churches, the leaders would do
When
that
you say
often.
when you say good, do you mean the ones that followed?
Yeah, the
the
super
religious doctrine?
charismatic,
Okay.
ones. The leaders in that organization would come very regularly to visit. The ones that kind of were lackadaisical, they would leave that off. But if
So you weren't even free of your house.
never.
Wow.
There was this one time I was sick, and I was like, I couldn't go anywhere, so I was home, and they decided to do a shepherding call on me on that day. I was
When you were
the
sick.
one day where I didn't show up to church events.
Wow.
They were gonna shepherd me because of it, but I was legitimately sick.
Yeah, probably not a good excuse.
No.
Yeah.
No, not at
Yeah.
all.
Well, you were only sick because, you made God angry.
Right.
So,
It's weird.
all right. So in 1952, Jim Jones becomes a Methodist minister, right? We know about this one. And he was a student pastor at a Methodist church. And while there, he decided that he wanted to build a playground. And the playground was going to be open for all the races to use.
The racists?
Racists to use, yes. It was only for white supremacists. It was a white supremacist only.
An only racist playground.
Right. All races
Oh, okay.
playground.
Okay. Got it.
And this is where, we I think you were talking about like what 5 people, if they died early, what we would have a totally different opinion
Right.
on.
From Reddit. Yeah.
Yeah. And someone said Jim Jones. And I disagree with it. Because I still feel that everything he did was to make himself look better so that he could get people to follow him.
Yeah. I think people say that because they don't know. They don't really, all they know is the major milestones is the early People's Temple that was not segregated.
Right.
And then Jonestown. They don't really know where he was before that. But if you take just on surface level, the early People's Temple, non-segregation.
Oh, there's even more where he looks like a freaking saint.
Yeah.
I mean, like the stuff that he's done. He changed Indiana politics and the desegregation movement in Indiana almost single-handedly.
So like that aspect, if he would have died then, I think he still would have been looked on as
I agree with that.
a hero,
I agree with that.
even though he had this problem.
He would actually, I don't think he would have died a hero, but he would have died, and he would have been in obscurity because he wouldn't have done quite enough to make a lot of changes. He would have just been a preacher that did a few things and that was it, and then died. So
Maybe they had a memorial or a plaque for him.
yeah,
But
like
now
locally.
he lives on in infamy.
Oh, everybody knows him.
Everybody knows who he is, and
Yeah.
everybody uses the phraseology
Yeah.
around Jonestown.
Exactly. So he builds this playground, and then shortly thereafter is removed as a Methodist minister, or not allowed a Methodist minister. I don't think he ever became one. I think he was in training to become one. And the church said it was because he was stealing funds from the church.
Yeah, which is probably true.
Right. Jim Jones says it was because they're a bunch of freaking racists and they couldn't deal with having a only racist playground. I mean, all racist playground.
Which is probably true too.
True, yeah.
They're probably both true.
I actually think this was one of those that both were true at the time. Especially when he had nothing. I mean, he had probably been trying to grab any money. Like money, having money, not a lot of it was important. Like just, but I don't know. There's not a lot of information about that. But although he was looked at the IRS, so I think he did have the greed thing going on. Now that I think about it. Okay, so shortly after that, the next year, he visited a Pentecostal latter rain church in Columbus, Indiana. And while there, and this I actually don't think is true. I think it was made up by Jim Jones. But while there, a woman sees Jim Jones, comes up to him and says, I see a prophecy about you, and that you are going to lead a great ministry, and you're going to have many followers on your great ministry. So if it was true, Jim Jones immediately that year started preaching at the Laurel Street Tabernacle in Annapolis, which was a Pentecostal church. So he changed from a Methodist to a Pentecostal church due to this prophecy. And also in that same year, he was a guest speaker in Detroit at the Pentecostal ministry, like the regional thing. So he was already within a year switched to being a Pentecostal preacher, and then brought in as a guest speaker for the Pentecostal church. So you could see like the any movement that he did, it was quick, and it was typically he went to go visit a church, liked what he heard, and instantly switched, and then started going down that path. And then when he realizes that this latter rain movement fell in line with the teachings that he learned when he was 11, that if it just flowed right in. Like I think this was at the moment that he goes, oh, I found my group. I found my group that I can do good work in to push my message. So that was in 1953. In 1954, he was dismissed for stealing church funds.
Again.
So I'm thinking, yeah, he probably did steal funds from the Methodist church as well.
So he stole money from the Methodists and from the Pentecostals.
Yes. Yeah. And also in that year, he adopted a kid. It was a Native American girl who he named Agnes. Okay. So
he had a bunch of kids, didn't he?
Yes. Only one that was his. Only one that was his biological. Right. Maybe two. That's 1977 stuff. So, in 1954, he's dismissed for stealing the funds.
How old is he in 1954?
1954, he's 23.
23, okay.
Yeah, he's not old at all. Like, wow. And just think of all the stuff that has occurred. It's only been 5 years out of high school, and he's gone through all of this stuff.
Wow.
He's become a minister in 2 different churches. He's stolen twice. He's built playgrounds. He's adopted kid. He went to become a doctor. He got another education. So it's all 5 years. So whatever you say about Jim Jones, he worked.
Yeah.
I mean, this man never stopped. And when he did stop, it was only a quick pivot to something else. So for all the negative, like this guy worked.
He's a hustler.
He was a hustler. So in 1955, he has a joint meeting with William Branham. And William Branham, he runs a Pentecostal, the healing revivals.
Mm-hmm.
That was his big thing. That's where he got. So William Branham is that's what he's known for at this time.
Healing?
Is the healing revivals.
Okay.
Yeah. So he would be the ones underneath the tents doing the you're cured from cancer and all that other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And through illegitimate means of getting information to show that he's smart and stuff like that.
Yep.
And that's when I didn't realize that those healing revivals come from the manifested sons of God. So this is a belief in a certain subsect of this church. I'm not going to say all of it and not even in latter rain, not everybody believed this as well. So it's not like your latter rain, this is what you believe and, fall in line with it, but that the certain members of the latter rain movement believed that people would have healing powers, be able to heal cancer and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but this guy was just a charlatan, though. He would.
Yeah. His was more subdued than what Jim Jones does.
Mm-hmm.
Jim Jones is basically he doesn't pull any punches when it comes to how much of a charlatan he can be during these revival.
Because he's an atheist, and it's a means to an end, right? So it's a way that you can get people to convert to communism, or it's a way to
get people to just join your following.
Right.
And
so that when nuclear war happens, you have your group of people there.
Yeah. And there might have even been a part of him that was like, we need money and we need people to survive nuclear Armageddon.
Mm-hmm.
He might have really believed that it was going to happen. Unknown.
I think a lot of people believe nuclear.
Oh God. At that time?
Yeah.
Can't even imagine. And at that time, I think my dad was probably when did the Cuban Missile Crisis happen? Was it like in the 50s?
60s.
60s?
I thought it was like 63.
Yeah. So at that point, my dad might have been just getting into working in a nuclear missile silo.
Yeah.
At that time. So he has he has this meeting with William.
62.
62. Yeah. You're almost spot on. Nice. So he meets with William Branham. And then in that same year, the Assemblies of God replaces Jones at Laurel Street Tabernacle because they are against the teachings of latter rain.
Mm-hmm.
So they realize they're teaching latter rain at this church. We don't agree with it. Jones is out at that point. So again, I always have to question what occurs here, because it was after he had the meeting with William Branham. I think he upped his latter rain teachings at this tabernacle.
Mm-hmm.
And people were like, this is not good. We're not a latter rain church. And then reported him to the whatever body that you would report somebody like this to. And then they removed him. That's my guess here, because it was just like all of a sudden after, how many years, after 2 years, they were like, we don't like latter rain anymore. I think he was pushing the latter rain onto this church.
I think he was probably stealing money.
That too.
And they just didn't say it.
Yes, that too, probably. Okay.
Because he was stealing money wherever he went.
Wherever he went. So in 1956, he hosted a healing convention at the Cadle Tabernacle in Indianapolis. And he renamed his church. So this is where it gets funny, because they never actually talk about when he started his church. But I think he when he went to Indianapolis, he just got a building and had a few people, but he named his church. You're gonna love this one. The People's Temple Christian Church Full Gospel. That's the name of his church.
Mm-hmm.
This was back in 1956.
But the People's Temple.
Yeah, and he started hosting the healing conventions now in Indianapolis instead of visiting other people's.
Mm-hmm.
And
if it's his church, he doesn't have to answer to anyone else. Then
you got
he gets the money.
You got it. And at this point, I don't think that his church is associated with any religious organization at the time.
I don't think it ever was.
Yes.
It? Oh, it was?
Yes, twice.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was brought in and kicked out. And I think even at the end there, it was still a member of one of these organizations. And they're in here, like one's the International Church of God or something like that. And it's the Disciples of Christ was one of the organizations that he was a part of. Actually, Disciples of Christ. The temple was a member of the Disciples of Christ in 1978.
I never even heard of the Disciples of Christ.
Yeah. I don't think they exist anymore.
Wow. They might have renamed themselves after Jonestown.
Yeah. And then also in 1956, so he's doing the healing conventions. He has his church in Indianapolis. He renames it to the People's Temple Christian Church Full Gospel, and then he visits Father Divine.
Mm-hmm.
So,
where's Father Divine?
So Father Divine, I have to look this one up where he was. So Father Divine, Philadelphia. So his place is called the Peace Mission. The Peace Mission Movement.
And was it a non-segregated church?
No.
Okay.
No, I think it was majority. It was a Pentecostal church, and I believe it was all African American. So if it was any other way, they don't speak about it.
Wait, wasn't John Waters from Philadelphia? Where's John Waters from?
That makes
sense.
sense.
No, I gotta look it up.
So Father Divine said that he was God, which follows the latter rain movement in the Pentecostal faith. So this guy was also labeled as a cult leader.
Okay, so John Waters is from Baltimore, not from Philadelphia.
Yeah,
so I was like, wouldn't that be funny if that's where you got Divine from?
Oh God!
I think Divine was already a drag queen before you even met her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this also starts the shift of what Jones is saying in public versus to the members.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and he learned that from Father Divine.
Well, what I think he learned from Father Divine was how to control your members.
Mm-hmm.
So Father Divine, that was what he was really good at, was controlling his followers.
Mm-hmm.
And he definitely had a cult following.
How big was his church?
I think he had 400 to 500.
Wow.
In his church. So what's interesting is Jones publicly would say that Father Divine's teachings were basically BS. That, whatever he's saying is not true. Privately, he was grabbing all of this information and utilizing it in his own preaching.
Mm-hmm.
So he witnessed at the Peace Mission, including setting up a soup kitchen and providing free groceries and clothing to people in need. So that's where he picked up this whole idea that if you want people to join your church, you need to have public displays of compassion to minorities and people that don't have money. So that's what he learned from
Father Divine.
Father Divine. We'll get back to Father Divine later because more interesting things happens there. And I have a little bit of like, this is the 1 year I think I don't have anything in 1957. I think just at this time he was working through his ministry, building numbers. And in 1958, he goes back again. Father Divine died. And he visits a memorial that's going on toward, for Father Divine. And his Father Divine's wife is there, she's saying that she's going to take over the ministry. And he says, I am the, when you're reborn, the belief when you get reborn when you die.
Reincarnation?
He is the reincarnation of Father Divine. He says this to Father Divine's wife and and his people.
And that doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't work that way, bro. That he has godlike powers and that he's going to take over the ministry.
Uh-huh.
That didn't go well.
Yeah.
So they called him the devil and they basically kicked him out and told him never to come back again.
Mm.
So what's interesting, though, is at the same time, that same year, Jones took 150 of his followers to a Baptist convention and faked healing someone of cancer on stage. And it was just a piece of chicken that they made cough up from this person who was planted that they had cancer, and he cured the cancer on the stage.
Wow.
Yeah. There are other stories too that he would drug his members, and then when they woke up, he would put a cast on their arm, like he would put a cast on their arm while they were sleeping, and then take them to the events, have them rip off the cast, and he healed the broken arm.
Wow.
Yep. So he would put people into the audience to be the people that would get healed.
Mm-hmm.
They come up on the stage. So he faked everything, but he gained 150 members at that event.
Yeah.
So he went from he poached 150 members from a Baptist convention to being kicked out of town and being called the devil.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that shows in that same year, I think only 2 months apart from each other. So he was literally doing everything. He was going everywhere just to get numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Doing where one, he said that he could heal people, to two, saying that he was, reincarnation of their cult leader.
Yeah.
Yeah. He would try anything. So that was 1958. In 1959, he adopted 3 Korean Americans, who he named Lou, Stephanie, and Suzanne. And in that same year, Stephanie died in a car accident.
Mm.
And in 1959, Jones and his wife had his only, that we know of, only biological child, who they named Stephen Gandhi.
Mm.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So in 1960, Mayor Charles Boswell appoints Jim Jones to the Human Rights Commission for the state of Indiana.
Wow. God, that aged like milk. Right? It's like, wow.
Well, I also think like North Korea was also part of the Human Rights Convention too for a while. I think they still are, to be honest with you.
Wow. Wow.
So yeah, we don't pick those people too well, do we? And in 1961, this is where things starts to get crazy. In 1961, Jim Jones basically passes out. There's no explanation what occurred. It might not even been real, but he passes out and he's taken over to the hospital in Indianapolis. And when he's brought in, they take him to the wrong ward. They put him into the black ward.
Mm-hmm.
He wakes up to them removing him, saying, we're going to move you back over to the white ward where you belong. And he says, no, I'm going to stay in this ward. And as he starts to feel better, he's going around taking care of the patients, changing their bedpans. A lot of Jesus work here going on. And so you could...
This seems like an unverified look at me story. This doesn't seem real.
Again, you got to take every single one of these. And unless I'm telling you that he's saying I'm a Marxist, he believes in the end of the world. You have to take everything with a grain of salt with this.
Yeah, this seems like maybe he did end up in the hospital, but it seems like
And he was probably nice to people, and that was it.
maybe,
Yeah, and that was it. So who knows? Who knows?
Or maybe he saw a black doctor.
Well, actually, no.
one
I
time.
remember. No. No. This was a big deal. His actions were a big deal, and due to his actions, the wards became desegregated at that hospital. So he shamed everybody basically into compliance, and shortly after that, that hospital was desegregated.
Interesting.
The wards were. And because of that, the People's Temple was targeted by white supremacists.
Wait, what?
White supremacists targeted the People's Temple.
Okay, yeah,
in Indianapolis.
as they would.
Yes. So
As is their charter.
yeah. So it's also, there's a lot of self-fulfilling prophecies with Jim Jones and the People's Temple, because he was telling everybody that if you leave my church, everybody outside of this church are KKK white supremacists, and they're going to kill you and murder you and rape your children and all this other stuff. So he was feeding them these lies, and then all of a sudden, let me rephrase that. I want to be very clear that in Indiana at that time, that was definitely a possibility.
Yeah.
But this was not a possibility thing. This is going to happen if you leave the church.
Right. It's a fear tactic that every cult leader uses.
Right.
Anytime I would sin, I was always afraid God was going to come and smite me.
Yeah.
Or anything I not sinned, but did something that was against the church.
Right. Have you been smitten yet?
Nah, probably.
Smatted?
Smoked. Smothered. Covered.
Ooh, now I'm hungry. So not only that, but in 1961, there was a quote in a newspaper that said, thanks to Jim Jones, Indianapolis was far more racially integrated because of his actions.
Mm-hmm.
So he actually made real changes in Indiana, and specifically in Indianapolis. So whatever his reasons for that, I'll give him a shred of kudos that his actions caused that. I don't think that that's what he was really after. That's not my feeling. I think it was just a happenstance. That
You think it was a ploy to get members?
Oh yeah, 100%. Because already at this point, he's already priming his members for cult membership. He's making them lie on stage at the Baptist conventions. He's telling them that if you leave this church, if you walk outside, that society is going to kill you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we've gotten the government yet. And there's a reason that I'm pretty sure it's not in yet. It's because the government hasn't talked to him yet.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as that happens, all of a sudden now it's the government is coming to get you.
Mm-hmm.
So any little thing that would occur in his life that was a negative, that's what he would tell his congregation was going to attack him. So that if it happened to him, it wasn't happening to him, it was happening to the church.
Right.
And that's the manipulation that I see in him greatly, is that what he was telling them was all the stuff that he knew was eventually going to come for him because of all the shit that he was doing in the background that they didn't know about.
Right.
So, so at that point, he,
So
yeah, good.
we talk about shit that he was doing. Has he started using drugs and alcohol regularly at this point?
Unknown.
Okay.
Unknown. We know that he uses drugs in California when he moves to California,
Okay.
but it's an unknown at this point if he is or not.
But
I don't think so because he's working so hard.
Was he an alcoholic also?
Unknown.
Unknown.
There's a list of drugs that he was using, but none of them were like he might have been using alcohol, but not an alcoholic. But again, unknown. He was using a bunch of other shit, like especially at in the 70s, late 70s.
Like the Trump family, allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly.
Allegedly.
Yeah. All right. He is also the first person to adopt an African American in the United States.
Oh, wow.
Yep. So again, it's like you just go, okay. He adopted an African American, Jim Jones Jr.
So he has a indigenous Native American. He has a white kid. He's got 3 Korean kids and now 1 black kid.
And another white kid.
And another white kid. So he's got 7 kids right now.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And the white kid's name is Timothy Glenn Tupper. And this is where you start seeing indoctrination. The mother was a member of the People's Temple.
Okay.
So he's now adopting children from members of the temple. So these people can never leave.
Right.
Like ever leave, right? And it was also at this point that he has visions of a nuclear attack on Indianapolis.
Yeah, that tracks.
And Branham, remember the guy who has that he learned how to do the revival things, also has a prophecy of nuclear war. So in 1962, Jim Jones goes to South America to scout a site for the People's Temple. So already back in 1962, he's already like, I need to build our own place.
Yeah. Did he go to Guyana?
On his way to South America, he stops in Georgetown, Guyana.
Well, Guyana is South America.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, yes.
Okay.
So, yes. But he goes to Rio de Janeiro. That's where he's really heading. But he stops in Georgetown.
Okay.
So, in 1963, they moved to Rio de Janeiro. So he's kind of just traveling around. They don't really say where. And he begins working with the poor in Rio de Janeiro. He sends a message to the People's Temple in Indiana and says, I need all the money so that I can do work here. And they send him all their money.
Yep.
That only works for a short period of time because by the end of December of 1963, he has to return to Indiana because the person that's left in charge is saying everything's turning to shit here. And he finds that the temple is totally out of money and completely divided. So he basically returns to a shit show. Everything's because he's not there. The charismatic leader is gone.
Right.
And people are not in control anymore. And I think they're getting woke up. Is what's starting to occur. So, so he regains control and he says, all right, guys, July 15th, 1967, nuclear war.
Oh, wow.
Nuclear war.
He put a date on it.
1967, July 15th, 1967.
Wow.
So they have 4 years that Indiana is going to be wiped. Not the world, but just Indiana. So we should move to California because Indiana's going to get hit, but not San Francisco.
Yeah.
Okay. So in 1964, he's then ordained by the Disciples of Christ, So before he was with this IAAG thing or whatever, so he left them and now he's with Disciples of Christ. And so basically he's just going wherever people agree with him, or he's going to get power, or they'll overlook shit.
Mm-hmm.
So Disciples of Christ.
And
Okay.
that's what he was with till the very end?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. So in 1964, started looking at California for places to move. And then in 1965, he moved the People's Temple to California with 140 followers.
Where in California did they move to?
So it was a place called like Elijah or something like that. Is up north. It's north of San Francisco. There's a map here. Sorry, I got to go through my list again. It's earlier than that.
Wouldn't it be weird to go on a People's Temple tour?
Yeah, I would do that. Ukiah, California. And in California, he had Santa Rosa, Sacramento, San Francisco, Fresno, Bakersfield, and Los Angeles. So he had temples all across California.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, he lost, 140 followers is nothing. I think he probably lost 2/3 at that point.
They didn't keep the church in Indiana.
Oh, yeah.
So they still could have attended in Indiana.
Yes, but it was not Jim Jones's temples, People's Temple.
Okay.
So that's where it's all super weird.
Does the People's Temple, does it still exist today?
I think it does, actually.
Wow.
Yeah. So he moves there, and they've got no money now. They moved to California. And those are his core. So if you think about it, these are the people that were indoctrinated. He left, and they still believed when he comes back.
Yeah.
So those are the people that are going to follow him anywhere. If you think about it, you're moving from Indiana to California, and 140 people go, yeah, I'll go with you.
Yeah. That's a lot.
That's a lot. So he takes a job, because remember, he has a degree in secondary education.
Mm-hmm.
So he takes a job as a history and government teacher at an adult education school. And he, right from the bat, is going to use this to gain members.
Right. Yep.
So he has members of the church attend every class. So he has at least one member in every class. And they are listening to the people in the class and manipulating them to start joining the church.
Did he honeypot them?
No, he just would rape them.
Oh, wow.
Only if they're men. So, yeah. Yep.
Wow.
Multiple stories of Jim Jones raping the male members of the congregation.
Wow.
Yep. Yeah. And so that's why everybody goes, his work in California. No. It's batshit crazy already. Mm-hmm. He's raping members. He's adopting their children, and again, 140 people follow him. None of this should be looked at as good.
And they're willing to lie for him.
And they're willing to lie for him.
And manipulate other people for him.
Yep. So he's got his 140 core.
Mm-hmm. Those are his lieutenants.
Yep.
So they're the bad guys, and he comes off as the savior.
Yep, absolutely. So he was ordained by Disciples of Christ in 1968. They're formally admitted to the Disciples of Christ. So they are now a standing member of the Disciples of Christ. And what that gives him access to is their 1.1 million followers for the Disciples of Christ.
I need to look up, see if they're still around.
So the thing to remember about the People's Temple and the Disciples of Christ for the timeline that I'm going to give you is that Jim Jones from 1966 to 1977 contributed $1.1 million to Disciples of Christ. That's equal to, I think they said 24 million in funds nowadays. So for 11 years, they were giving a ton of money to the Disciples of Christ organization.
Mm-hmm. And that's what those organizations care about.
Yes.
Is money.
Yes. So shortly after joining Disciples of Christ, he poached members from the Disciples of Christ, and the People's Temple in Indiana membership was at 300. So just the Indiana membership was up to 300.
Okay, so the Disciples of Christ, they are still around, but from where they were in 1968 was, what did you say, 1.5 million?
Yeah.
In 2022, they had 277,000 members.
Well, still a lot.
A lot, but
Not anywhere near.
nothing compared to what they were in the 60s.
Yeah. And I got my timeline completely wrong. I'm sorry. So it was, so after in 1969, he poached members from the Disciples of Christ, and the Indiana membership was at 300. So in 1970, that's when they went to the Baptist convention. So he took 100, I think it was 150 followers. Yeah. So he sent 150 followers to the Baptist church and then faked curing the cancer and the broken arm of one of his members. But he gained 200 followers that time.
So it's worth it.
And then in 1971, visited the tomb of the Father Divine, told him that he was the reincarnation of Father Divine, and got kicked out. Okay. But also in 1971, the Indiana State Psychology Board was looking into the healing practices and accused Jones of quackery. So now in 1971, you've got Indiana basically coming out and saying you're a hoax. In 1972, San Francisco Examiner did a huge write-up on Jones saying...
This is what,
72.
72, okay.
Mm-hmm. Showing that Jones was a hoax.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but no one reads the newspaper.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who reads the newspaper?
Yeah. Well, apparently he does. Well, this is where things get... This is the beginning of the jump.
Right.
All right. It's 1972. So 1972, he's got now people in Indiana saying he's a hoax, people in California saying he's a hoax. In 1973, he's got over 2,500 members.
But so they're saying he's a hoax, a hoax as in that he can't cure cancer.
Yes, that everything that he does on these stages is fake.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like completely he has...
So it's faith healing that he's trying to get members on.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that is like the lightest bit of investigative reporting that you could ever do.
Yeah.
That a faith healer is a phony, you know.
Like what? Faith healer is the real deal.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty much a standard thing at this point, but I think this was kind of a new thing for them to do news on.
Mm-hmm.
Like now, you hear that stuff, you know it's just a fake immediately. Like, not a lot of people give it credit. I'm sure there are groups, but not a lot of people give it credit.
Well, there was a guy in South America, John, like the faith healer John, that Oprah Winfrey endorsed.
Yeah.
He ended up to be like a super sex pest.
Yeah. And again, same thing. Like you get these people in high, like government agencies and, popular media and stuff like that endorsing Jones. And it's not because of that stuff. It's because of all the other stuff that he's doing. He's got his, rainbow family, which is what he called it, the rainbow family. He's against segregation. He's against racism. It's like he's hitting all the checkpoints that if you're a person in power, you would be like, yeah, this guy's cool. Absolutely. Right. So, Ross Case, who was a former member, this was back in 73. So in 73, he's got 2,500 members and he has 36,000 people on his fundraising newsletter. So everybody's like, there's a lot of people getting information about him. Ross Case, who was a former member, he did a whole expose of uncovering the staged healing, the poor treatment of women, and how Jones raped a male member of his whatever you want to call him, one of the church members. And he was also arrested for masturbating in front of an undercover LAPD vice officer in a movie theater restroom.
Jim Jones was?
Yes. Yes.
He pulled a Pee Wee Herman.
Yes. Now, this is where it gets weird, right? The case was dismissed and sealed, and the records of the arrest were destroyed. That's the part I don't get. I have two thoughts on this. One, that it really happened, that he did masturbate in front of, he was in
a gay bar.
he was in a movie theater restroom, and
yeah,
and the guy said whip it out, and he did.
Yeah.
And then, since he was such an outstanding member of society, that the mayor told him to just bury it, get rid of it and bury it. Or two, because of all this stuff that he was found as a hoax and quack and all the allegations of rape, they wanted to get him out of town. So they just cooked it up to get rid of him. Either way, now you have the police after you. Now you have the police. This is where it goes, oh wow, we got the police now. The government is after us. We have the government is after, and they're coming for us to arrest us. So in 1974, this was the next year after all of the stuff was coming through, Disciples of Christ receive abuse allegations with the People's Temple. 1974, land was bought in Guyana. And the first group also traveled to Guyana to start building. So you have all of this stuff coming out that he's a fake, that he's a quack, and then all of a sudden now he's buying the land in Guyana. Yeah, when you look at the timeline, it's clear.
So it's weird though. Do you think he was a gay man trying to live as a straight guy? Or was it all just about power for him?
I think it was all about power. I really do. But either one it would have been weird for him to live his life without anything else coming up. Does that make sense?
No.
Like, you would have had people in high school talking about that he came on to him, or
oh, I see.
There was no other information that there wasn't even a question about any homosexuality. That was the first time that you actually hear about it at all. And I do feel that it's a way of putting power. And that's why this whole thing about the masturbation in front of an undercover LAPD officer is kind of it's kind of sketchy to me.
You think it was trumped up? You don't think it was real?
I don't know.
Well, it's the LAPD.
I know.
They lie about everything.
1973 LAPD too.
Yeah.
It's not like, like, who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows what happened? And it's also like, if he masturbated in front of somebody, nowadays they'd just be like, hey, stop that. Can you not do that? It wasn't in front of a kid, right? So it's like, if you do it in front of a kid, you immediately get,
I don't know.
arrested for that. But
I think you would still get arrested for that. It depends on where you are.
that's true too. But it's San Francisco now.
Well, LAPD is LA.
LA, yeah. So again, no idea. It's just, it's a very weird piece of information.
It is very weird.
And again, I'm not looking at this as whether or not this is real or not. I'm looking at this as a timeline issue. So 1973, he's arrested. 1974, he's buying land in Guyana. It's that to me is more interesting than.
And it triggered the psychosis. So where it would,
And he's already on drugs at this point.
yeah. So what drugs was he using?
I think he was using like a form of meth, and then there was like 5 or 6 drugs. They're like, it was a concoction of shit.
Interesting.
And this is the stuff they found like in his body, like barbiturates. But when they found him, they don't know if that was
Naturally occurring.
no, like he took it only that one time before ending, everything. So, okay. So he buys the land, and he's got people now going out to the land. 1975, he gets the mayor of San Francisco elected through his work.
Yeah.
And is also made San Francisco Housing Authority Commission.
Okay.
Ahead of it.
That is so weird.
Yeah. And in 1976, he had an interview saying he was agnostic and or atheist. And he was at a testimonial dinner for Jones. The governor was there. The lieutenant governor was in attendance. And Willie Brown, who was doing Master of Ceremonies, who was like a big in political scene in San Francisco, said that Jones was a combination of MLK, Angela Davis, Albert Einstein, and Mao.
Wow. Jeez. Ugh.
Guess who else was a big supporter of Jones? Think of San Francisco back in the 70s. Harvey Milk.
Interesting.
Harvey Milk was a supporter up until the news came
Wow.
out.
Because he was like anti-segregationist.
Yeah. Yep. But Harvey Milk was also,
the first openly gay.
Right. So that also, was it because Jones was gay, or was it because Jones supported gay? It's like, it's weird. It's really weird. At that time, this is all 76. He met privately with Walter Mondale on his campaign plane to talk to him about things. He met with Rosalind Carter. Rosalind Carter was there at the opening of one of the temple things. Yeah. So, I mean, like, if you think about it, so he's buying this land because he knows shit's coming on, but he's still in the limelight with people that are in power, singing his praises, putting them in positions of power.
Mm-hmm.
And
while his members are suffering.
While his members are suffering and being raped.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. All right. So, in 1977, Disciples of Christ gets another abuse allegation. I think they were getting constant.
Probably.
Yeah. He has an interview with the New York Times promoting Marxism and calling the Bible a paper idol.
And they should worship him, not the Bible.
They should worship Marxism. Marxism is the truth. The Bible is lies.
Interesting.
Marshall Kilduff of the New West magazine exposes abuses at the People's Temple, both physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. And then 600 members arrive in Jonestown, with 400 more in the months that follow. He sold all of his assets and had around $44 million today. He had about $10 million worth of assets when he went to Jonestown. He took a child belonging to one of the members to avoid a custody battle. And this is, I don't think he actually cared. There are rumors that was his child. But there's no way to prove it. But that the mother that left did have sex with Jim Jones. But the main reason was that the father was going to Guyana, and to avoid custody battle, they basically kidnapped the child and took the child to Guyana.
That's heartbreaking.
Yep. And then also during this time, Jones traveled to Cuba to establish a trade with a San Francisco company who was owned by one of his members. So he's talking to, he tried to talk to Fidel Castro, who wouldn't see him. And then basically said Fidel Castro is an idiot and, lives better than his people and nobody should listen to him. Sounds very familiar with someone in the news nowadays. And on December 10th, 1977, his mother dies. Lynetta Putman dies. All right, so now that's the end of 1977. So,
and he's still in California?
No, we've now everybody has gone to Guyana.
Okay, but there's still churches in the United States,
Yeah.
People's Temple churches?
A few of them. He sold most of them off.
Okay.
So at this point, I think the San Francisco office is still open and the Indiana office is still open.
And the true believers are in
Guyana. There are a few that aren't, but they're more like custodians of work that needs to be done in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1978, a group called the Concerned Relatives Group was formed. And they met with the State Department and Congress with grievances over the temple, the kidnapping of children, abuses, et cetera, et cetera. And they were old members, and they were giving the details on the crimes committed by Jones. So this was a group of all the old members. At this point, Jones hired a John F. Kennedy conspiracy theorist, Mark Lane, and Donald Freed to make a case of a grand conspiracy against the temple. So there was he had a name for it, but there was a Black Panther that did the same thing. So he hired like tabloid news to write an article showing that this was a grand conspiracy by the military or the police and got away with like basically domestic terrorism. So Jones wanted to do the same thing. So he actually hired conspiracists to write a conspiracy against the church. So he's already trying to, kind of whitewash everything, Jones then sent a message to the Soviet Union so that they could resettle the temple commune to Russia. So he wanted to move the People's Temple to Russia at that point. So the issue with Jonestown is that the place sucked.
Yeah, yeah.
Like the soil all around Jonestown was good to grow on, but where Jonestown was horrible. It was almost infertile soil. So they're trying to grow crops. Now that none of the crops are growing, but like you have $10 million and you can't get food to your people. So they were starting to run out of food and resources. And that's when he went to the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union sent a
representative.
Thank you. To Guyana and said, what they're doing is great. This is in line with our, the spirit of communism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Can we move to the Russia? No, not, So at this point, Jones enacts the White Knight, Knights, N-I-G-H-T. And what they are is he would have people out in the woods, in the jungle, shooting, mimicking that the temple was being attacked by armed guards, by militia, and they would do it once or twice and then tell everybody, no, it was fake. They had a 6-day siege. So they had people firing in the jungle for 6 days while they were huddled in to survive. And they were just reciting prayers and good mantras and everything else.
And not sleeping.
The majority of the people there were children and old people. So it was only like a select group of people that could actually work.
Mm-hmm.
They were overworked. They were underfed. They didn't get any sleep. So he was doing this on purpose. He told them, don't feed them and don't let them sleep and take away their money. If we do that, they'll be too tired to do anything and too poor to help themselves.
Yep.
And he said that to one of his lieutenants. So Jones knew what he was doing. He was controlling them 100%.
Mm-hmm.
And then every so often after one of these fake white nights, they would have a vote to see if we were going to do a ritual self-destruction.
Mm.
And then they would fill up a big ton of Flavor Aid. Everybody would drink it. He said there was poison in it. Everybody believed him. And then nothing would happen. And he said, you passed. You're the believers. And he did this multiple times. So he was
prepping them for what happened.
Prepping them. Yep.
Wow.
Yep. So this was going on, and you still had like reports coming out from Jonestown of abuse, and you also had people, the old ex-members were talking to Congress still. Like there was still a lot of work that was going on outside.
But there's no way to leave. There was no way for people to leave because of there was no infrastructure there in Guyana.
So there kind of was. And you remember, Guyana was a British colony. So they could have, if they were able to get to the airport.
Mm-hmm.
But he had these teams of armed guards, like the Red Brigade, I think is what he called them.
Mm-hmm.
And they were keeping members from escaping.
Yep.
A few did, but not much.
Yeah.
So the typical thing, like how do you control people? You make the people control the people.
Mm-hmm.
So they would for punishment, they would bury people in coffins 3 feet under the ground. And then the other members would come by and scream at them for leaving or eating too much or sleeping or whatever it was doing. So he had everybody perpetuating the abuse. Okay, well, might as well get into it, right? November 15th, Congressman Ryan led a fact-finding mission to Jonestown.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to go into much detail about this because it's horrific. But I'm just going to go over the quick details of it. So Ryan gets there, and his team has got like NBC reporters and cameramen, and some of the ex-members are there. You know, they're trying to find out any information that they can on their son that is kidnapped, or
Mm-hmm.
anything like that. They're allowed in, and they talk to people. They have Jones goes through a whole sermon while they're there, showing like everything's fine, and someone passes a note to one of the NBC cameramen that says, "Nothing is good here. We want to leave." It was meant to go to the congressman, but the information gets through.
Mm-hmm.
So they go to leave, and the congressman says, "Okay, I'm taking these 12 people with me," or I think it was 8 or 12 people. I can't remember. And Jim Jones goes, "Okay, you can take them." So they go back to the airport, which is like another 3 or 4 hour drive or something like that. They get to the airport, get in the planes, and as soon as the plane door shuts, one of the people that were trying to leave had a gun and started shooting everybody inside the plane.
Wow.
2 groups of men come from the jungle and start shooting at the planes, and they start taking off. And Ryan, Harris, Brown, Robinson, and Parks all die in the plane.
Mm-hmm.
One of them was the cameraman and actually recorded himself being shot.
Wow.
So he had the camera pointing out and was filming, and then died, like literally on camera.
Wow.
The other plane takes off, and they were the ex-members and some of the people that wanted to leave. So they got out. So as soon as...
Can you imagine the guilt that
Yeah.
everyone has?
Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine any of this. Like, so some of the people that didn't get into the plane escaped into the jungle. So you got people that some took off, some were in the jungle, but basically the Red Brigade failed, was not able to kill everybody, and that information gets back to Jones. And immediately after hearing the information, a large metal tub with grape flavor aid is prepared. So one of the things that Jones had done immediately after forming Guyana was that he got certification to be a jeweler, someone that works on stuff. So do you know what they use to clean jewelry?
Don't know.
Cyanide.
Oh, interesting.
So he was buying half a pound of it a month.
Wow.
So that tells you
He was preparing
preparing
long ahead of time.
This was, I still feel that all of this action was a self-fulfilling prophecy. I feel that in 1977.
How old was he at this point?
So he would have been 47.
Wow.
Yeah. So.
And he could have taken that $10 million and
done anything with it.
Yeah, just escaped and.
Right. So after everything is prepared, Joan orders a revolutionary self-destruction. I'm not going to use the real word, but I think everybody here understands what I'm saying. And he told everybody that you're basically just going to fall asleep and die. And that's not the way cyanide poisoning works.
It's a pretty awful death.
It's a really awful death. And so the true believers probably went first. The people later were given a choice. The Red Brigade can slit your throats, or you can take you can drink the flavor aid.
Wow.
Jones was found with his head on a pillow and a bullet to his head. And the thought process is that he didn't actually kill himself. So what's also interesting, too, is that in early 78, Jones was really sick. He lost like 40 pounds or something like that. His like body would swell up and he was in pain constantly. But he got better after the end of right before Ryan showed up. He was feeling better. But I think that was also led to the fact that he was pushing the agenda more. So I think in taking the child, he knew that the government was going to send people to investigate. He also had financial crimes that the IRS went to Jonestown to investigate as well. So he knew the government was going to come. There was no way that the government wasn't going to come. So he knew that they were going to come.
Wow. How about all those kids? Did all those kids, like, what happened to them?
All of his kids?
Yeah.
Oh, well, they were part of the Jonestown basketball team.
So they all survived?
They all survived. So I believe they came back and the Guyanan police held them basically in jail because they didn't know what to do with them. They didn't know what they were going to do, if they were going to hurt themselves or hurt others or what. So they held them in jail for like months until they could figure out what to do with them.
So all of his children survived and everyone else's children died. That's wild.
Yeah, I think they don't actually say, like, there's once the tragedy ended, you don't get information about the the family, the children, which I agree with, because if, like, you'd have to change your name, and then, I mean, some of these people wouldn't have to change their name. They didn't have a name anything like Jim Jones,
Mm-hmm.
but you'd want to change your identity and move on with your life if that's where you're headed. So,
Can you imagine having Jim Jones as your father? Like, that's
yeah,
just so weird.
it is weird. In San Francisco, they got notice of the revolutionary self-destruction, and they said destroy all of our enemies. And the leader of the San Francisco office went room for room, slitting the throats of everybody.
Wow.
And then the last two remaining killed each other.
Wow.
And there was a, like 6 months later, I think it was, one of the members was a reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle, I think. And he arranged a press conference in a hotel room, and had all the reporters from all the different San Francisco magazines and stuff like that show up, and gave a, talk about what occurred, and talking about how the government was involved and blah, 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 blah. And then went into the bathroom and shot himself
Wow.
with everybody in the room. And had a note on him, like, saying, if in a year you're not finding government organization into our deaths, then the evil one, or something like that. So up until the end, he was a true believer that this was the government involvement.
So earlier on, you had said that Jim Jones predicted nuclear war at a certain date.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened when that date came and went? What do you say?
They don't talk about that. Well, what does that matter, right? I mean, it was only 1967, which at that time he was just getting disciples left and right. I honestly think at that time he had so few members that it didn't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
And you understand how these organizations take information like that and then twist it, right? Well,
And he was the master.
it's because we averted war, or I did something that averted the war, or
Right.
the numbers were wrong, my math was wrong. Hey, you can't blame a guy for getting his math wrong.
I'm not a nerd like you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, don't forget too, we've got $10 million just sitting around.
Mm-hmm.
Which was given to the Soviet Union embassy in Guyana.
Wow. So his kids didn't get anything?
Nothing.
Wow.
Nobody got it. It was given to the Soviet Union.
And they're just like, thank you very much.
That's basically it. They were like, thank you. You guys don't know what revolutionary self-destruction means, because that's not it.
Mm-hmm.
And this ties really, like, everything about this ties to something else. And it's like, you can go down this rabbit hole of information that is just insane.
Mm.
Because one of the things that this ties to, and I think what he was referring to, is the victory cult that we covered.
Right.
Which we haven't released that one yet. We should link that one once it comes out. But that in the victory cult, Russia believes that you go to heaven and all of your sins are forgiven, no matter what you do in life, if you die on the battlefield against an evil foe. So I have a feeling that his ideals also was a perversion of the victory cult and their fundamental beliefs as well.
Was he thinking that by doing this, by everyone doing this, they would trigger a nuclear war, or they would trigger the events of an apocalypse?
No. I honestly think that from what I read, his belief was that by doing this, he was going to cause the United States to fail because it's going to show how evil capitalism in the West is, which was one of his core beliefs, that capitalism and Western ideology is inherently evil.
Yeah.
So what and that's what I mean by the perversion of the victory cult, was that by dying, you're showing to others how powerful you are, right? Like, you're willing to die for your country, for Mother Russia. It's the same idea.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to die to show that communism is right. Look, we have a point. We killed ourselves to do this. And that sentiment also goes true with like other immolation deaths, where people are committing self-destruction in the name of something to show that it's wrong, especially in communism. That was a big thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Was you're fighting against something that's fighting the people. So I'm going to set myself on fire to prove to you, and then that can make change later.
Okay. So after all of this, what do we learn from?
Well, one, he seems the key idea of a cult of personality.
Mm-hmm.
That if you look at what he did in the public eye, he was almost a saint. If you were to water it down, when you start looking at things really closely, you realize there was more out there that just people ignored. But let's just look at what he did. Like, he worked in soup kitchens and took care of the needy and took care of the homeless and gave people shelter and fed them. And it's all...
He was an anti-segregationist.
Anti-racist. And, like, everything he would say followed along in this idea. But if you look at people that do this today, they don't want any, like, they're almost hate to be in the limelight. The people that are working in the soup kitchens and stuff like that, they just work in the soup kitchen. They just do the work. But Jim Jones made sure that it was all public. Everything I did, the building of the playground was made massively public because he was trying to prove a point.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not saying anybody that wants recognition for good works should be looked at, but anytime that people are brought up high, everybody has their faults. Like, there's no such thing as a perfect person. So the more someone's elated, is the farther that they can fall. So you really just got to, like, before you just believe that someone's inherently good or inherently evil, always look into what they're actually doing and what their message actually is.
And if somebody wants you to move to a camp, because that's really kind of where he trapped people. They couldn't leave at all.
Well, and it was also the exchange. It was the exchange of assets for room and board. That was his whole thing, was if you give me your paycheck, you have a place to live.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you have a paycheck, just buy yourself a place to live. You don't need... That's called being a landlord, but you're giving a landlord to a religious leader.
But he was offering an integrated societal community, is what he was offering. And so people that were looking for that in their lives, that was appealing to them.
Yep. And I don't know what to say about that, because if there's a lot of communes that work.
Are there?
I'm sure there is. I mean, statistically, there has to be a few.
There has to be at least one commune that works.
Well, I mean, I've heard stories of, communes that have lasted decades and without an issue. Just people left because they just don't want to do it anymore. But
So that's the key is like, can a person leave or not leave? If they can't leave, then.
well, you got to be careful with that one too, because the want to leave and the ability to leave are two different things. If I have given you everything, I can't just leave.
So it's financial abuse along with all the other abuses that people endured.
Yeah, and if you ever want to put someone in charge of an organization, a cult leader into the worst organization, it's the housing authority.
Yeah.
So he could also place the people where he wanted them to live, which is what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
So he was telling people who to marry, who to have sex with, where to live, and then taking their assets.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, the mayor is basically saying, "Oh, you're doing a great job. Thank you so much."
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what the reporting was like, but there looked to be enough news reports of him, but like in Indiana. And so that's where Jim Jones was smart, because he was like, "Oh, this is getting too hot. People are figuring me out here. I'll just move to California."
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what he did.
And then from California moved to.
Well, actually, it was, first of all, Rio de Janeiro. I think he was super close. I think if the temple didn't fail, he would have moved to Rio, and it would just have been a Rio thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it would have taken longer for it to occur. But if he moved to Rio, maybe he wouldn't have gotten into the drugs like he did when he went to California. Who knows? So it's just kind of all over the place.
Or maybe he caught like malaria in Brazil.
True, too.
And that's what, like some kind of brain eating something.
Amoeba or something like that. Yeah.
Who knows?
But you can see that there was like, it was okay a little bad, it was okay a little bad, to holy shit. Like he just, either that or everything he was building was just like in limbo. And then all of a sudden it all hit at the same time and he had to take an action, which is what I think as well. But I mean, like IRS was after him, the CIA was looking at him, the FBI was investigating him, the police were looking at him, the disciples of Christ were looking at him. He was kicked out of all the, I mean, it was just thing after thing after thing after thing, But he just pivoted so quickly and he reacted so quickly and he worked so hard. He never gave anybody a chance to put the two things together. And it's not like you could Google the guy at the time.
Yeah.
So whatever happened in Indiana was an Indiana thing.
Yeah.
So once you got to California, it was brand new. All the stuff that happened at all of the other Pentecostal churches and Methodist churches, that was all old news. It was wiped clean when he moved.
Yeah.
And then he brought his followers, and now he's got 140 people ready to
do his bidding.
To do his bidding and help gain more members.
Yeah.
So, I don't know what to tell anybody, like, looking at all of this. Because I can almost put myself into the shoes of the people that came to the church.
Yeah.
And I probably would have believed too.
And then you would have lost control, and at that point, it's all done.
Yeah.
Once you lose control, you're done.
Once you give control. And I think that's also the difference with him, is that these people didn't lose it. They gave it. And at the time, they gave it to a benevolent individual who was really looking after a minority, multiple minorities. I mean, we keep saying black, but it wasn't just black. Although 67% of everybody that died at Jonestown was an African American.
Wow.
20% were children.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that, like, once those families are committed, they were done.
Once they left to go there, that was it. As soon as they got on that plane to leave, it was over with.
Yeah.
Because as soon as they got there, Jones knew at that point, I have complete control.
Well, if he was doing practice sessions with the flavor aid, then
Yeah.
that's it.
And that's the other thing too, is it wasn't Kool-Aid. It was Flavor Aid.
I know you were shocked when you learned that.
Oh my God. I actually wrote on my last page, the lies.
You're going to start singing, drink the Kool-Aid. No, drink the flavor aid.
Drink the Flavor Aid. Yeah. Yeah. They're probably not in business anymore either because of that. I mean, I would imagine that would have.
I don't know.
Yeah, you should look
I
that
think
up.
Flavor Aid is still around. Seems like they are. All right. Are we wrapping up?
Yeah. I think we're good. And so thanks for listening, guys. This one was a difficult one for me to process all the information and look through. There's a lot that went on, and the outcome is just horrific. So just after watching this, I'm gonna go have a beer, and I'm gonna go watch something funny on TV because going through it again is still really rough. But I appreciate everybody listening. Thank you so much. And this has been Carl.
I'm Nicole.
We'll see you guys.